What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today I want to teach you a skill that can allow you to take anything in your head and create it visually. This is something that can benefit you financially, artistically. I think it's a great thing to know as a video editor. Blender is an amazing 3D software and it's 100% free, so you have zero barrier of entry. This video is a free beginner's course for editors that want to learn Blender. There's a lot of features in Blender, but you don't need to know everything. I'm going to tailor the information in this video to only show you what you need from a video editor's perspective. You can follow along as we create two easy projects, one After Effects to Blender 3D composite and one fully 3D scene. So sit back, relax, grab a drink or a snack, download Blender for free if you haven't already, and let's hop in and get started. By the way, if you're looking for any plugins, presets, extensions to save you time and create cool effects, my digital asset store is at the top of the description. All right, guys, so here we are within Blender. This is what every new project is going to look like. You have your three objects here, your light, your default cube, and your camera. You can see any objects you have in your scene over in this little menu bar in the top right. And if you want to, you can switch to your camera view just by clicking this little button. We'll talk about that later. If I was to go up to render and just click render image, you'll see a quick little rendering of what that will look like with the light source, with the object portraying from the camera view. So keep that in mind. Now, some basic navigation. You guys can see what I'm doing in the bottom left here, everything I'm clicking and typing. So to do a quick little rotate, you just click in your mouse wheel and you can move your mouse left and right. If you would like to do a pan, you can hold down Shift and the mouse wheel. You'll see you're only going to move left and right. So easy little pan. And if you'd like to do a zoom, you can either just use your mouse wheel to go in and out, or you can hold down Control and you can hold the mouse wheel in. So pretty easy, just using the mouse wheel to rotate, holding Shift to pan, or going like this to zoom. I think it's probably the easiest navigation to get the hang of. Not a lot of shortcut keys. Again, just a lot of mouse wheel. So how do we add things into the scene? Well, if you click Shift A, it's going to open up this add menu, and you can also just go in these tabs in the top left. These are pretty useful when you don't know the shortcut for something. You can go to add here and add in anything just like you were clicking Shift A. Object, a lot of the things like setting your origin, parenting, things like that are all within these menus. Same with selecting and view. So again, if you don't know the keybind shortcut for something, just look throughout these menus here. But Shift A is an easy one to remember. So Shift A, and you can add in any mesh. So any of these primitive objects here. If you want to move anything, you can click G. You can see now I'm just moving my mouse here, not holding down G, just click it once and you can move your mouse around to place this wherever you want and then click to set that in place. Very, very easy. Just remember G as in grab. Now some more transformation keys here. We talked about G for moving. You can also click S for scale. You can also click R for rotation. And if you don't want to use the shortcuts for any of these, you have these transformation little tool sets over here. So you can click and put on all of these different little axes, this little gizmo, move on different axes. You can rotate on different axes. You have your scaling tool. Do you want to scale by one axis or the other, or just rotation? This is your selection tool. So you can select via box. If you click and hold, you'll see additional options, kind of like in Photoshop. So select circle and select lasso. Now let's skip over to the navigation bar here, and you're going to see a bunch of different tabs that you can go through. And I really love how Blender does it this way because it's a pretty easy, nice little color-coded way of keeping everything organized and easy to find. So starting from the top, you have your render properties, and we'll come back to this at the very end of the tutorial. I'm using Eevee right here, which gives you some really quick renderings. And again, we'll go through here and optimize this at the end. You have your output settings, which is important for setting up your resolution, your frame rates, setting up the output folder, which you're eventually going to render this out to on your computer. Very important here. You layer properties, I don't use this much. Scene properties, again, I don't use this as much as well. World properties, we'll come back to here later whenever we talk about lighting, which is good for getting realistic reflections on your 3D renders. Object properties, this is a big one here. So this contains all of the data for where this object is in your 3D space. So you can see your transform. So essentially, if you don't want to click G to move everything, if you want to be more exact, use exact values, I recommend you use the location transform properties here in the object properties. So you can take these values and move by the exact axis, so X, Y, and Z. Same with your scale. Maybe something's too big. You can type in like 0.5 here and then just copy and paste this value into each of the axes for the scale. Very, very useful. For positioning, you just type 90 in there if you want like a nice right angle. So keep that in mind, little yellow box, that's for transforming. Modifiers, this is where you can add in all your fun magic, and everything's, again, organized. So you have all your modify modifiers, your generate modifiers, your deform modifiers, and your physic modifiers. And I'm not going to go through what every single one of these does. We will talk about some basic ones like the subdivision surface, which is very important later on. But again, we'll come back to this in a bit. You have your particle properties, that's for adding particle systems like emitters or hair. Physics, it's for adding collisions, cloth simulations, fluid simulations. You have your object constraints, which is useful for parenting, tracking. You have your object data properties, not to be confused with your object properties. The names are very similar. Sometimes I mix them up. This is useful for vertex groups, which is basically isolating a specific part of an object so that you can assign that part to something in specific later on. Shape keys, which is used for things like facial animation, and then other things like UV maps, vertex colors. I use this sometimes, but not too often. And then this one, extremely important, your material properties. This is where you can create different materials to give colors, looks, reflections onto your objects so they're not just dull and gray. And we will go through and create some different materials very soon. Before I do that, I want to finish up some of our basics, mainly being the difference between our modes here in the top left. So you're gonna have this drop-down mode. And it's very important to make sure you know which mode you're in, you know which mode you need to be in to accomplish a specific thing. A lot of people, when first starting out, can get really mixed up by this. The main two modes are object mode and edit mode. You think of object mode as just placing your objects, changing around where they are in the 3D scene. And you want to think of your edit mode as specifically altering the object that you have selected. So for example, I'm in edit mode here. I can't click on the cone because I had the cube selected. I have to go back into object mode, select the cone, and then switch to edit mode. And you can do that easily by clicking tab. Now I can change anything to do with the cone. So let's select our cube here. And I'm going to talk quickly on 3D modeling. I'm not going to go in depth. This in of itself could require long tutorials, but the good thing is there are thousands of different tutorials on YouTube for Blender. There's a huge community, vast amounts of knowledge out there. So when it comes to modeling and using edit mode, let me give you the most basic little workflow for modeling anything. And of course, this is extremely basic and dumbed down, but you have your cube, you go to your modifiers here, so the little wrench, and you add in a subdivision surface. So this is essentially going to smooth the mesh out. In our modifiers here, you can see the subdivision surface, and you can add in a couple of iterations. So right now it's showing 1, let's put it up to 2, put it up to 3, and you see the more I put it up, the more smooth this gets. It's also increasing the polygons here, so make sure you don't overuse this because it could make it pretty hefty, but it's a great way to smooth things out. Now, once you have things smoothed out, you can click tab and go into edit mode, and you can use all of those transform shortcuts that I showed you at the beginning. So for example, clicking G to grab, you can grab a specific point and move it like that. And right now we're in vertex mode, so we're only able to select these vertexes. If you want to change that, in the top left here next to edit mode, you can see you have vertex mode, you have your edge select, and you have your face select. So if you want to select the edges, you go to edge select. If you want to go to the faces, you can grab face select mode. And just like everything else, click S to scale, click G to grab, and a big one for 3D modeling is clicking E to extrude. You can do that from every side, and this is why I say it's extremely easy to 3D model just by adding a little subdivision surface, clicking E to extrude, G to grab, and S to scale. Just by doing that, you can create a bunch of different things just from your imagination. Maybe reduce some of the subdivision surface to make this a little bit more pointy, and we'll try and make like a little basic sword. So to make this pointier, we can go to vertex mode. If you want to select multiple things, just hold down Shift and click to select. Click S to make that a bit more fine point. I recommend you guys familiarize yourself with those basic shortcuts. Again, I'll mention them one more time. S to scale, E to extrude. So say you want to add on to this mesh any which way, you select in, let's say like face select, you click E and you just drag out. You can really make a staggering amount of things just by knowing those shortcuts, by following along tutorials, using some reference images, and another amazing tool in your arsenal for more detailed things when it comes to sculpting. You can switch, instead of edit mode, you can go to sculpt mode. And you have all of these different brushes here to smooth, to grab and move things around like elastic deform, or just the grab tool here where you can grab the mesh and do whatever. So very useful. I have a tutorial talking about making cartoon characters within Blender. So if you guys are interested in this world of things, you can check that out. Let's move on to an actual mini project here that you guys can do, follow along with. We're gonna bring in a 3D car model. I'm going to create materials for it. I'm going to light it, and I'm going to place it into our scene in After Effects. And I want to talk about utilizing free 3D models because I feel like for beginners, where they get stuck is all of the ins and outs with modeling, UV mapping, all the steps it takes to really create models from scratch, texture models from scratch, this, that, and the next. I think it's great to start with free 3D models because there's thousands of them on the internet that you can experiment with, get the knowledge of how to actually import these, and then how to change them in Blender before you go ahead and learn those important advanced skills. So this is Turbo Squid. You guys can find any 3D models here, extremely simple. Let's just search for something like a skull. Now what you want to do is go to price and go to free to browse all of the free ones. It'll be denoted with this little orange tag. And you can also search by formats here. So you can search for the project file for the 3D software you're using. So if you wanted to 100% open within Blender, you can just download a Blender project file by searching through there. Now, other than the specific project file, you want to look for either an FBX or an OBJ file, and those are the two most common file formats for a 3D object that are interchangeable between any 3D software. So we'll download the Blender file, and it also comes with the textures, which we'll talk about a bit later. So we'll download both of those. Because this is a Blender project file, we can just click and open in Blender. Now, if this wasn't a Blender project file, if it was like any of these, an FBX or an OBJ, what we would do is in Blender, we would go to File, Import, and we would import in whatever file format that object is. So if it's an FBX, you click here and search for it. Because this is a Blender project file, we can just click and it'll open up. So once you open up a Blender project file or import in the object, in the project file sense, it's going to open it up with the layout that the original creator was using. So here's all the parts of the car broken up. Now what you're going to notice here is you don't see any color. Everything is just gray. To actually see all the textures, we need to switch to the rendered viewport shading. So very, very important. Always change in the top right. This will show you with the lighting influence if you click all the way on the right, or if you don't want all the lighting influence, you can just click here and this will just do the viewport shading material preview. So now we get a preview of the materials without all of the lighting influence. So this came included with textures. It preloaded the textures, but we want to show you how to material from scratch. So I'm going to go into the material properties here, and I'm just going to remove every single texture, and we're going to start completely from scratch. So we just have the object without any of these materials already placed in. All right, so we have a blank canvas here. We have our object in, but no materials. So let me show you how we can create our materials and apply them to our object. So one thing you guys should know, I recommend as a beginner, you ignore all these different tabs up here. I recommend you instead use this window here. So if you drag up, by default, this is going to be your timeline. And this is useful for creating motion keyframes, for creating different animation, and for playing back your animations. You can also change this view. So if we click here, you can change to any of these different viewports. So the main one for our materials is going to be the shader editor. So we'll switch to that. You're going to see just this blank canvas here, and that's because we don't have any materials. So let's select the body of the car and let's click to create a new material. Now in your material properties tab, so we can click here in our navigation bar, make sure you're showing this, you can see all the materials for this object that we've created. And over here, you can see the nodes for that material. Now, if you're not seeing that, make sure you have use nodes checked on over here. Easily change around our materials. We can either use our node here, or we can just use our material properties over here on the right. And you have your base color. Very simple. Click and you have this color wheel. So we can change it to any color we'd like, or we can just take the lightness and we can put that down to black. So let's make like a matte black color for here. Now, all these other options that you see within this node and in your material properties, the main two that you need to know is the specular and the roughness. Specular is basically the reflections and the reflectivity that you're going to see with this material. So as you see, if I crank that up, you're going to see more of the lighting bouncing off of our car, and our roughness is going to cancel out that lighting. So if you have something like a rubber material, that's going to have less specular and more roughness. If you have something that's shiny like metal, it's going to have a little bit less roughness and more specular. So keep that in mind whenever you are creating these materials Those are the two main ones you do need to know. Now, of course, all the other ones are important, and we'll get a bit more, and we'll talk a bit more about those as we go along. But for now, I want to talk about something very important, and that is applying materials to specific parts on the model. So you see here, whenever we select this, it's just selecting the entire body of the car, and we applied our material, and it's just making everything in this selection matte black. But what if you want to make something in the selection a different material? Well, we can do that by adding more materials and then assigning that material to where we want it to be. So we can click this little plus sign, and keep that in mind. Anytime you want to remove a material or add a material, you click plus or negative here. So let's click plus, and again, we can name this matte body color, and let's name this, let's maybe make this logo here silver. So we'll name this, so we'll click new, and we'll name this silver logo color. So on our silver logo color, what we want to do is apply that to this part here. And we can't actually select that in object mode. To select a specific part within this selection of this object, we need to switch to edit mode. So go ahead and click tab. Now you can see all the different parts of this object. So let's go to line select. Let's go ahead and click on the logo. And you can go to the select tab here once you've clicked on the logo, just one little part. And you see there's a lot of tools for adding onto the selection. So you can select by linked. And as you can see, it's going to select all the parts that are linked to that selection that you originally specified. You can select more or less by using Control Numpad plus or minus. So those are very useful. And now we have the selection of that logo. So once you have that selection, you just want to click on that second material that you created and then go ahead and click Assign. Now, once we go back into object mode, you see we have the first black material on the body and our second material on the logo. So that's the easy process of adding custom materials onto custom parts. It's really just selecting it within edit mode. Again, we'll select like these grills here. All right, so let's go to the face select here and just select this front grill. And then we're gonna go up to select and select linked again. Now what we can do is create a new material, or we can just reuse any other material if we wanted to, but I'll just create a new one. Click new, and we'll name this front grill, and we'll make this a bit darker, and then we'll just bump up the roughness, and we'll assign this. Object mode, and there you go. So going through here and just adding in what we want to these specific parts. So I'm gonna fast forward here and just repeat that process to create basic colors, basic shaders for each part of this car. And whenever we get to something a little bit more specific, like adding glowing lights for the lights here or adding glass for the windshield, I will pause and I'll talk about how to create that specific thing. Now, I should say here, if you want to reuse any material you've already made, so for example, if we go into edit mode here and I'll select here and then select linked. If we want to make this the same color as the logo that we set up earlier, instead of having to create a new material for this object and go through from scratch, add in a new slot, silver color, assign, just like that. Again, if this rubber wasn't here that we needed on the actual tire, it would look like this. So make sure you add that new slot and then use your drop down. When it comes to the windshield glass, let's go to edit mode, and like everything before, you can go to face select, and then we can just go to select and linked, Control L. Or if for some reason that isn't working, you guys could always just use your individual selection tools. So if I have my box select, I can hold down Shift, just go like that. Or I can hold down Shift and select any individual faces here just to add into that selection. So it's good to know how to do things manually instead of relying on a lot of the shortcuts. So there we go, just by holding Shift, using our selection tools, we have the selection that we need. And just like before, we're gonna go into our material properties, create a new material, and we'll go ahead and name this windshield. Now for this, and then we will assign it. So back in object mode, what we can do with this is we can make it a bit transparent. And to do that, you want to select the glass material here, and you want to scroll down. So this is your surface. You want to scroll down to the viewport display, still in our material properties. And you want to change your blending mode. So something like alpha clip. You can also go to your node editor, which should still be open. And this is showing the node with our windshield selected. You can scroll down to the alpha and just lower that to be able to actually see through, just like this. All right, so let's create a different type of material here. Let's create some glowing lights on the car. We're gonna do the same like we did before. We're going to click tab to go into edit mode. We're gonna select the faces of the lights. So we'll go select. So now we have the lights selected. We're going to go to our materials and we're going to create a new material. And we'll go ahead and click new and we'll name this glowing. So back in object mode, we're going to create a emissive material for these headlights. To do that, it is very easy. Again, with your node, with your shader editor still open here, you want to come down to this emission and emission strength section. Now we can change this to whatever color we'd like the glow. So if you want, you can put it up to white, or maybe even like a tiny bit teal. And then we can take our emission strength and crank that up. Now from here, it doesn't look like there's any glow, and that's because you need to actually change your render settings to be able to see this. So in Eevee, it's very simple. You just go over to your render properties and you come down to the bloom section and just check that on. And there you go. You instantly have a very nice glow, and I love how the glow looks in Eevee. All right, so now let's talk about lighting, a very important part of this here. Now you need to look at lighting the same way you look at lighting with a camera in real life. It's going to 3D mimics real life. So if you guys have experience with a camera, if you're a cinematographer who also edits, you're gonna have a great advantage here. All the same rules for lighting apply. So if you want nice cinematic lighting, you could do something like click Shift A in object mode, go down to light, and let's create an area light. Again, you can click G here. You can go to your object properties, give it a little bit of 90-degree rotation. You can set up something like a 3-point lighting setup here. So we'll click S to scale that up. You can click Shift D to duplicate, and then just click where you want to set it. Another big thing here is make sure whenever you're placing things in 3D space, you're looking at all angles. Sometimes whenever you're like this, you can click Shift D, go like that, go like this, and it looks like everything's good, but you need to rotate and make sure that you're placing and aligning everything at different angles so that you can get things in the exact position that you want. So looks good. We can go up in our objects and find our 3 area lights. And whenever you select these area lights, you're gonna see, if I was to select this object, you have different options in your navigation bar than if you were to select the light. You have this light section here, and you can take this value and crank it up. So we'll give something like 200 watts on the power for all of our area lights. And then what we can do, we can go to our environment settings, this little red world, this world properties. And for some reason, the project file had this built-in RGB color for the strength. So we can just remove that for now. And you'll see it goes back to default. And now you see, if I toggle on or off my lights, you can see how that lighting is changing our object here. So when it comes to environments here, environment is essentially the 3D surrounding reflections that are really going to change the look of your model. So for example, if you have a car in daylight versus a car at night, it's going to look different because in the day, there's a lot of bright things reflecting off of these specular textures versus at night, your car is going to look different because you have a different environment, you have different lighting, different circumstances. So the same goes for 3D. When it comes to placing in your own custom environments, you can use something like a site called polyhaven.com. They have free textures, models, and HDRIs, and that's what we're looking for. An HDRI is a 3D environment file. It's basically just a 360-degree image, usually super high resolution. So if you're trying to place your car in like a nighttime scene, you want to go for an HDRI that's at night. And same goes for any of these others. You want to find an HDRI that matches the type of vibe that you're going for. So let's maybe look up something like city, and we can find some sort of urban HDRIs. Maybe this one, Blue Lagoon Night, looks pretty cool. Or this one. So let's go for Blue Lagoon Nights, and you can download these for free, which is great. And all you have to do once you download that is in your world settings, your world properties, click this little yellow dot next to color, and you want to add in an environment texture. And then we can click open, and we can load in that EXR HDRI that we got from Polyhaven or wherever. You can also take custom HDRIs on set. So for example, if you're trying to composite a super realistic 3D model into a real life scene, maybe you're making a short film or something like that, to composite it as best as possible, you want to have a 360 camera and capture the environment that you're trying to composite so that you have the exact environment, you have the exact reflections. And you see, if I just rotate around here, you can see how these city lights are reflecting on my car. So if you don't want to see this crazy city in the background, you want to go over to your render properties again, go down to film, and you want to check on transparent. That way, whenever we render out, you're still gonna have those reflections, but it's not gonna render with the background, the HDRI background. Now from here, I'm just popping into my camera view, and if you want, you can tweak any of these textures now that we've optimized the lighting and optimized the HDRI environment. So for example, we can click on the wheels here, again, still with our shader editor open. I can add a bit of metallic value just to make those look a bit more realistic. With the body of the car, you can mess with your specular if you want more or less reflections. It's really up to you. Now what I'm going to do at this point, I'm going to show you, because again, this is centered towards editors who are trying to learn 3D. I'm going to show you how to take something like this, a 3D model that we added our materials to, we added some lighting to, and how to place it in our footage in After Effects. Once I show you how to do that, we're gonna come back to the scene. We're gonna throw away all the After Effects camera things that I'm gonna show you, and we're gonna just build a 3D scene around this. So again, you have two things out of this tutorial. One, how to composite this car or any 3D object into your footage using this After Effects script, and how to create a full 3D scene just using Blender. So to do that, let's fire up After Effects. And while After Effects is firing up, I'm going to go on pexels.com and get some royalty-free stock footage similar to the HDRI lighting. We have like a nighttime city here. And again, that's why the environment is so important. It really depends on the footage you're using. So either way, in After Effects, we can create a new project here, and we can drag our footage straight into our project bin. And then we can drag our footage onto this button to create a new composition. All right, so let's find a spot where we'd like to composite our 3D car into the scene. So maybe something like here. We can grab this bar and we can trim this composition, right click and trim comp to work area. And then all we need to do is right click on this footage, go to track and stabilize, and track the camera in After Effects. All right, so we got a pretty quick track here, and you can see all our tracking data. Looks pretty solid. If it's not smooth like this, maybe because your footage is too shaky or there's too much motion blur. So we're gonna use this bullseye here to figure out where we'd like to place our 3D car in this scene. So how about we place it at this red light here next to this car? So maybe we'll right click here and click create solid and camera. And then what you can do is scroll through here and try and see what that solid's looking like in your scene with the track. And you can even go in here and orient this track solid just by opening up the transform a little bit better and changing around some of these settings. So I'll go ahead and make this a bit more flat, and I'll scale it down, move it on the Y a bit. And that looks good. So if we click play, here's what our tracking looks like. And again, this is the placeholder for where we want to put our 3D car into our scene. So to take this data and place it straight into Blender, it's very easy. I talked about this free script, which you guys can download. The script comes included with instructions on how to install this into After Effects. It's very easy. Once you do it once, it'll always be here in your script section. And you can see right here, export composition data to JSON. And you have your install script right there once you do download it. So I can just click to run this script. You want to click so that we're only doing the work area here. And then I want to browse and save this in the folder for my project. So we'll name this AE camera data and save it, and then we'll export. So once we've done that, we can hop back into Blender. And once you've installed everything correctly, following that instruction manual for the After Effects to Blender script, you can go up to File, Import, and you can import in After Effects composition data. So you're going to see we have some new objects into our menu here. We have the 3D camera tracker orientation, and if we open that up, we have a new camera, and we have all of the keyframe data if we switch back over to our timeline for that camera. And if I scroll through here, you just saw that camera kind of whiz by. This is the exact camera motion that we captured from After Effects. So all we really need to do is switch into our camera view. And if any reason this is defaulting to the first camera, what you can do is just find that. It's in our old collection here. We'll just delete this for now. Go to this camera. Now when we switch to the camera view, here is the perspective of our camera. So you're going to see here, you have two planes. You have this plane here, and then you have the smaller plane in the back. So this smaller plane is the track solid that we created within After Effects. And again, this is the reference for where we'd like to place the car within our scene. This larger plane is essentially just a placeholder so you can see your footage while you are compositing. You can go over to your shader editor like before. We can click New. And all we have to do is click Shift A and add in an image texture node. And we'll talk about this a bit more. We haven't talked about nodes that much in this tutorial yet. So for now, we're just going to take the color of this image texture node and plug it into the emission. and then we're going to click open, and you can open up your footage straight from After Effects, the same exact one you used. Now keep in mind here, it's sort of white because it's reacting with our environment texture. So if you want, you can put the strength down to 0 to be able to see that through. And also keep in mind here, we sort of trimmed this composition a little bit. So in After Effects, we're starting around 4 seconds, and it actually shows the frame number that it starts at here as well, 123. So you can copy that frame here in Blender. We can take the offset and place that at 123. Now, if we go back to the timeline, you can see our footage is moving accordingly, and we can even scale this up. We can even scale this up to fit the camera. Right now we're 1920 by 1080. This footage is 1280 by 720. So again, you can either scale it up, and if you don't want it to scale from here, this is like the anchor point. You could just select, go to Object, Set Origin, Origin to Geometry. You'll see now the origins in the center. Now we get a rough look of what this footage is going to look like. What you can even do here is select this plane, go to your material settings. So here's the material that we're working on. We can name this footage. Scroll down here and lower your alpha a bit, and then go down to the settings and change the blend mode to something like alpha blend. That way you can actually see that track solid through here, so we know where we want to place our car. That's just optional, of course. What we can do here is just take our car. So quick tip here, we're going to take all these area lights, we're going to place it into this collection so everything's all together. Let's actually click Shift A. We're going to create an empty here, so an empty plane axis, and we'll name this car control. And this is like a null in After Effects. So anytime you want just a blank sort of placeholder to control a large set of objects, you can create an empty, just like a null. And then what we can do is hold down Control and just select every single object in this collection, and then hold down Control and click and select the car control last. Then we click Control P, and that's going to set parent to object. So essentially what we did was just pre-composed all those objects into this empty. So it's like a null again from After Effects. And that way, instead of having to select everything, move it individually, we can just click this one empty, click G, and now everything's going to move, easy as that. So now that we've done that, we can click G and just place the car on our plane. Again, making sure that we place it accordingly at all different angles. Again, you want to align here and make sure so everything's backwards right now. Let's go ahead and just change the rotation. So 90, around 180. And the reason why we have this here is just so we can kind of scale everything a bit better. So you can click S and scale down so everything kind of fits. In a perfect world, what you could do is take these area lights and sort of change them around so they match the scene that you're trying to composite. Go like this. I can move it up so that's sort of like the street light here. And again, this is just to give you a sort of lineup. You don't need to worry about this. This isn't accurate because it's not scaled with the camera. Once you have the scaling and everything dialed in just from this still, what you guys can do is just delete this image here. We do not need it. That's essentially all we want right here. So we can go in and make any final touches. Like for example, you could add some red to these brake lights here. So we'll click Tab. Just like we did with the front lights, Control L to select linked, Shift click, Control L to select linked. Then in our materials, we'll create a new one. We'll name this brake lights. And if you guys even want to, we'll go to our shader editor. You guys could just delete all the nodes in your brake lights here. You could go to the glowing headlights and just copy these nodes. So Control C, and then just paste them in here. So there we go. And we'll click Assign. And you see we have the lights in the back, but we can change the color for our brake lights. But we can go to our emission color and make them red. All right, so that is about it. That's how we can create animations and composite our footage from Blender into After Effects. At this point, the only things you would need to do is you could make this plane here a shadow catcher object. And I'm not going to cover that in this video. If you want, I recommend search on YouTube how to create a shadow catcher for either Eevee or Blender. So for now, I will go ahead and just hide this plane. We'll go ahead and find that object right here, hide that in the viewport and in the render. And then you could go to output properties and render this out, and you're good to go. So I'll show you the render properties later. Again, I wanted to take a little break just to show you that After Effects compositing. Let's go back to creating a full 3D scene here with our car. So what I am going to do here, I'm just going to select in our empty here with all of the lighting, with the car parts. I'm going to hold down Shift and select all the car parts. I'm going to click Control J. And that's going to join them into one object. I can double click and name that car. And then I can right click on this car and I can select mark as asset. What that's going to do is it's going to place that in our asset browser. And this is a new feature for Blender 3. To be able to see that, you click here like as if you were changing to your shader editor, but you go to asset browser. Now you have this file. Now the only issue here is you can't just drag and drop this into any file like this. What you need to do first, what we do is we go up to edit and preferences, and then you go to file paths here, and you're going to see this asset library section. So you can name your asset library, and this is going to be the file path for your asset library. So I recommend what you do is you open this and you copy this location. So click Control C. And then what you do is you click File for this project, Save As. For the location here, you click Control V to paste in your asset location. And then you can just save this project file into your Blender asset file folder. That way, whenever we go to File New, we can open up the asset folder, the asset browser. In current file, nothing's here. That's why we saved it to that location, our asset location, because we can just change this from current file to my assets. So because we did that, we can just click and drag this car into any new project, easy as that. So a great little workaround for creating assets or moving assets between different projects. Now what I'm gonna do before I show you how to render everything out for that After Effects composition, I'm gonna show you how to create a full 3D scene because I wanna give you both of those skill sets. All right, so within this fresh project with our car, we're gonna create our entire 3D scene. So let's create a street because I want to show you how we can utilize different textures using the node editor. So to create a simple street, very easy, we can click Shift A in object mode and we can add in a mesh plane. So we'll click S and just scale that up, G and just move that a little bit lower. And then I'll go to my object properties here and I'll take the scale values for Y and I'll just stretch that out. Now we can select this plane. We can go to our material properties and create a new material. And we'll name this street. And then we can switch over to our shader editor and we can see our nodes here. Now I'm going to show you some useful tricks for creating good materials. So you can go into Google Images and just search for something like road or street texture and just save a simple little image like this. Now, that's the easiest way. If you want, again, you can go to Polyhaven and search for a free texture. And sometimes these will come included with different 3D maps, which are going to make them look a lot more realistic. So if we search for road here, here's asphalt, we can go ahead and download this, and we'll go ahead and download just this normal image, because I want to show you how you can combine both. So we'll go ahead and unzip this, and then we'll pop back into Blender. Let's take a look at these folders just to see what these are looking like here. So we get a textures folder. This is from Polyhaven, and we have what it says diff, disp, and rough. And you also have nor here. So you need to get to know the names for different types of textures. And it's pretty easy. If you scroll in here, so diff stands for diffuse, disp stands for displacement, nor stands for normal, rough stands for roughness. And sometimes there's other ones like specular maps, subsurface. These are all different images that are corresponding to different channels in this node here that you could plug in. So, for example, the diffuse. This is basically just your normal color texture. We can place this into our base color node. And to do that, we click Shift A and we search for an image texture node. And what we can do is click Shift D with this selected and just duplicate this a few times. And then you just open up the image that we saved from Polyhaven. So we can go here to textures and open up the diffuse. And then you can just drag the color straight into the base color. And instantly, you guys are gonna see the image that we saved from Polyhaven onto our plane. Now notice here, because we stretched the scale of this plane, it's also stretching the scale of the texture. So we'll talk about that in a bit, how to change around the mapping. For now, let's just keep opening these up. We wanna open up here our normal. For the normal, I recommend you guys search for normal map node. Then you can plug it here, and that way it properly converts. You can also change the strength. And then we'll go back in here and get the roughness, and we'll place this into the roughness. Now keep in mind here, you can mix and match these maps. So for example, I can go to our diffuse image here that's plugged into our base color, and say I want to go back and use that custom one that we saved from Google. So this one here. Now what we're getting is a different diffuse, but we still have the same normal and roughness. So again, if I was to remove that, you're not gonna have the same sort of reflections from the lighting. Let's go over to Let's go back to polyhaven.com, and I just downloaded one of these rusty metal textures for free. Give you one more example of how we can use our nodes. So say we want to add in a license plate here. Well, this actually came with a texture for a license plate. If not, you could just search for a license plate image from Google. And what we're going to do is we're going to click tab, and again we're going to go to face select, and we're going to select this area here, and we're going to create a new material. So let's name this license plate, and then we'll assign it. And we'll go ahead and just grab this one. So I'll save this image back in Blender. We'll open that image here. Now you're going to notice here, you don't see this image, and that's because we need to change around the projection. So here's a great way for changing the way that different images, different textures are projected onto the object. First, what you want to do is click Shift A and add in a mapping node. And next, what you want to do is Shift A and add in a texture coordinate node. And then we connect everything here. You connect the mapping vector to your image texture, to your image vector, and then you connect the object for your texture coordinate onto the vector of your mapping. So you see we have a slight change here. And then you guys can mess around with the scale and the location here to better place this where you want. So I could go to my scale, put this at like 0.5 for everything, maybe even a little bit lower, maybe like 0.2s. Now that's the difficult way of doing this. An easier way of doing this is by switching over to the UV editor, and by opening up the image that you're trying to project here. Then you switch over to edit mode, select this area, and you click U, and you click unwrap. Now you can see exactly in the UV editor, you can actually select here and click G. You can see exactly where it's projecting. So I can do something like this just by clicking G to move these points where I like them. And then what I can do is go back to our shader editor and just change back the scale. So we'll just put these back to defaults. Things are upside down. You can even select and click R and just rotate them around. Then go back to your shader editor and remove all the fluff. There you go. So we projected that onto our car using our UV editor. And again, sometimes I think the UV editor can be a bit tricky for beginners, but it is very, very helpful in Blender. And compared to the UV editing and other softwares, I think it's very easy in Blender and a great skill to know for correctly projecting anything you want onto these specific parts of your objects. Last little bonus tip here, if you guys actually go to edit preferences and you go to your add-ons, this is a free add-on that comes included with Blender. You can search for Node Wrangler, and it's going to give you some great commands. So for example, if you guys don't want to add in the mapping node and the vector node, every single time you want to change around how things are projected, you can just select one of these image texture nodes and click Control T, and it's going to automatically set everything up for you. So very useful. Now from here, I can make any adjustments like scale, etc. All right, so let's finish up this tutorial by showing you animation and then our final render settings. So we're going to add a quick little driving animation to this car and to this road. First off, to do that, we need to extend the road. And the easy way to do that is by selecting it, going to our modifiers tab here and adding in an array modifier. This is very useful. You see it already is adding some more chunks, but it's doing it along the x-axis here. So we can put that at 0 and instead make this the y-axis. So we'll set y to 1. We can also increase the count here. So let's maybe make this like 10. We have a pretty long road. Maybe make it even longer, like 25, goes pretty far. And then we can just take this road and center it a bit by grabbing the y-axis, moving it so we're a bit in the middle. There we go. So now let's switch over to our timeline and we'll talk a bit about setting keyframes. Since you guys are editors, you should be familiar with keyframes. So I'm just going to show you how to apply them. You guys probably know the ins and outs just from your time working with After Effects. So to apply your keyframe, what I recommend you guys do so that you don't make any mistakes is you use your object properties here. You see these little dots next to all these values. You can click and drag down to set a keyframe, just like you can within After Effects. So let's drag to the end here, so 250. Again, if you guys want to, you can change the duration to make this longer or whatever. And let's take the y-axis of this road and start moving it to the right, because again, we want the road to be moving backwards. So we'll go to about here. Now the key here, you see that this is orange. Now if I was to move away, this is just going to completely reset what I just did, which is not what we want to do. So again, let's take that, drag to the right, drag to the right. To actually set this in place, you guys need to click to actually set the keyframe, and that way it'll turn yellow and you'll see the keyframe pop up in your timeline. Another quick little shortcut to do that here is you can make the change and you click I while hovering over this, that'll set your keyframe as well. So we now have our road animated and extended. Pretty nice. If you guys want, if you don't want it to gradually start and stop, you can just take these keyframes and just drag them a little bit out each way. So you remember earlier when we were transferring projects, we joined all the parts into one, and I don't recommend you do that unless you are completely ready with everything, because now we have to separate objects. And I did this on purpose so that I can actually show you how. So to separate objects that are joined together, we select it, we click tab to go into edit mode, and then we can just go ahead and start selecting parts of the wheel. So again, you can click Control L to select linked. Okay, so I think I have all of the parts of the wheel now selected. What I can do to disconnect this from the rest of this object is I can right click and I can go to separate and by selection. So now you'll see this pop up, car.001. We can double click and rename this to wheel. Now, if we go to object mode, we have our wheel separated from our car. So let's make this rotate. With our object properties, you have your rotation here, and you'll notice our rotating isn't happening in place. It's kind of rotating around this weird giant semicircle. Again, you have to think of it in After Effects terms like your anchor point. We want to place our anchor point in the middle of the wheel so that it'll spin in place. And the anchor point is your object's origin. We can select our wheel, go to Object, Set Origin, Origin to Geometry, and it's going to automatically place it right in the middle of the wheel. Very nice, useful function. If for any reason it's a little bit off, you guys can even go in here and take your 3D cursor and click it right in the center, and then you can go to Object, Set Origin, Object Origin to 3D cursor. There we go, right in the center. So let's create a little keyframe for our wheel moving. We want that to move in the -X. We'll go ahead and hover over there and click I to set a keyframe, -400, and click I to lock that in. And let's see what that looks like. Way too slow. And move these a little bit so that it's not a gradual start. And that looks a lot better. So I'll repeat those steps on the back wheel, and instead of actually doing all that, I'm just going to get my selection, and then I'm going to delete it, and then we'll go to select and select more, delete the vertices. So select the wheel here. I'm going to click Shift D, and before I move anything, I'm going to click Y, and that way I can only move on the Y axis. So it's a great way to move things a lot more precise. Now we have our two wheels going along like that. Pretty simple. All right, so the last animation thing I'm going to leave you with here before we do talk about some render settings, we're going to talk about the graph editor, and we're going to talk about using some modifiers. And this is a really cool trick that you can do within Blender. So say, for example, you don't want this to be so smooth. You want the car to kind of be bouncing on the road a little bit more. What we can do is select the car here. We can go and switch, instead of the shader editor, instead of the asset browser, we can switch over to the graph editor. Now, you're not going to see anything here, and that's because we need to set a keyframe first. So let's go over here, and we want to kind of add some bob onto the Z axis. So we're just going to add a little keyframe here for the Z, and now you see this blue line pop up. And we can expand, and here is our Z location data. So if you guys click N, you can open up this menu here. Just go over to the modifiers tab, and let's click and add a noise modifier. So this is really useful. You can do this for any axis. You can do this for rotation, whatever. We can take the scale and just kind of smooth it out. And let's take the strength and put it at like maybe 0.2. So it's not so much bobbing. And now we have a little bit of sway going on with our car. So really cool. And I think it's a great way to just add some like custom movement without having to go through and painstakingly change around things yourself. We can go to the wheel as well. And same exact thing. We can add a little keyframe on the Z. We can open up that Z ruler location and add noise. We can make this 0.1 so that our wheel is a bit more bumpier than our actual car. So pretty cool. If you guys want to learn more about animation, I'll leave a bunch of tutorials down below, specifically creating line path curves and then having your car follow that curve so you can have them swerving through the road. You can make car chase scenes, very useful for other things. I've talked also a lot about character animation using things like Mixamo, which is extremely easy, especially for beginners. You just download a character from the internet, or you use a free software like Daz to create your own character. You drop that FBX character into something like Mixamo or applying some other free type of movement, and you can have a bunch of crazy animations for your characters. very, very easily. So I'll leave those tutorials down below if you guys are interested. Very beginner friendly tutorials. I'm gonna move on and we're gonna render this out. So let's talk about my render settings for Eevee. We're just gonna talk about Eevee in this tutorial because I think a lot of beginners tend to stick in Eevee. So I like to check on ambient occlusion, just adds a bit more realistic shadows. Bloom again, so we can have our glow. Green space reflections, you can see that's adding a little bit onto the ground. Motion blur is a cool one. We can add that on here since there is a bit of motion, especially with the tires going on. See if I go to render and render this image. You can see the motion blur in effect. You can of course change the shutter angle here. Make sure you go to film and check on transparent so that you don't render out any of this gray in the background. You guys can fill in your own backgrounds, or if you're making a full 3D scene, you could model using those tips from the beginning to make like stanchions for the side of the road or whatever. And that's really about it. If you guys want, you can raise the sampling here. I've always kept it at 64 and I thought everything looked fine, but if you want some more quality, maybe try doing that. Once you've done that, you want to go over to your output properties. And this is where we can set things a bit better. So frame rate, frame start and end, we have about 250 frames here, and it should adjust in the output settings automatically. Pretty easy. Frame rate, if you guys are compositing this into your footage, you want this to match the frame rate of your footage, which you can check by going to your project bin, just pulling that out here, and this is like 30 frames per second, 29.97. So if I was compositing this, which we will in a bit, I could just go set it to my frame rate. So let's scroll down to output here. I like to output as TIFF, and then we want to click on this little folder and we want to set up our own render folder. So this is our project folder. Every file that we've been working on, I've just been placing in here. I always go ahead and click to create a new folder, and we name this car scene render. Double click, and you want to set a name for the files that'll go in here. So I'll just name it car and accept. That way we can go up to render and render animation. You'll get a preview. Let's go and find that folder that we just set up. You're gonna see the car renders pop up here. So that's why we set it up as TIFF, and we make our own folder here so that we can have everything set up properly. So once your render in Blender is complete, you can go back into After Effects. And with our project bin here, you can right click and go to import multiple files, and you want to navigate to that output folder for all of those frames. Here is car scene, just select the first, import as footage, import, and then click done. Now the first thing you want to do once you've imported this in is you want to change the frame rate. After Effects is always going to import this at a 30 FPS, so it works fine. It works fine in this case because this footage is around 30, but if for any reason it does differ, you right click, you go to interpret footage main, and you assume the frame rate that it's supposed to be. So I'll put it to 29.97. So check it out, pretty cool little car render. Again, our background is transparent. You got the motion blur, which isn't the best in Eevee, I will admit. I think in Cycles it is a bit better. Now let's go back and render out our car composite that we set up with that After Effects script, where we're gonna place it right there. So let's go back here, and we can just end it right where we passed the car. So 185, just like we did before. Let's go to our render settings in Eevee, make a new folder for this one and name it Blender Composite 2AE. All right, and then same as before, we'll import multiple files. We'll find that new folder, select the first and import, and then we'll set the frame rate. Okay, so for our composite, you wanna drag in this image sequence, and keep in mind here that this is actually a different resolution. So we want to fit this to comp, and you see it pops exactly into place. Because this was a 1920 by 1080 in Blender, this scene is actually 1280 by 720. So we can hide our green track solid. And just like that, we've now added a 3D model into this scene. Now I wanna show you here because again, the importance of making the lighting match up. Things aren't gonna look realistic and it's gonna look out of place if the lighting isn't matching. Another thing you wanna do here, you can see this image is super crisp compared to this. So what you can always do is go and add something like a camera lens blur to account for any bokeh that may be going on with the camera. I like going for like between 1 and 0.5. You can add noise just to add a bit of grain. You can color correct, so we can add in a curves. I think that looks a lot better. May be able to hide some of your lighting mistakes just by doing that. And of course you want shadows. So in Blender, I recommend you export with a shadow catcher. You see there's no shadows under here. Under this car, we do have shadows. You could always trick it by opening up your track solid here. Let's go to fill and make it black. And then we'll just add a Gaussian blur. And let's actually pre-compose before we do that. So right click and pre-compose it, move all attributes into this comp, and we'll just click to reset that. Now we can blur, and you can even set a little mask that your shadow is where you want it to be. So there you guys go. You've got your 3D object composited into real life footage, track, and everything. I think it looks pretty good. So I hope you guys did enjoy this tutorial. I hope it gave you some insight as to how you can use Blender with After Effects to really improve your edits, add things that you couldn't before. It may seem daunting to learn a new software at first, but I promise you, the more and more you practice and the more experience you have with things like this, it becomes natural. I myself am no Blender expert. I've only been using Blender for about a year, maybe 2 years. I used Cinema 4D before that, so I did have some experience with 3D coming into this, but I'm always learning something new, and I hope I can pass that knowledge onto you as I learn it myself. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Full beginner courses like this, I usually like to pick one niche, unique topic, but I felt it was important to give people who only know editing, who only know After Effects, the means of being able to watch these 3D tutorials and implement them into their own work. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for supporting, and I'll see you guys in the next one.